Now to our first conversation. Nigeria's manufacturing sector is navigating one of its most delicate transitions in years. Caution caught between emerging macroeconomic stability and stubborn structural constraints, while inflation is beginning to ease and exchange rate pressures show signs of moderation. Let's find out how the factories across the country are faring. Joining us for this conversation now, Mr. George Anofowokan is the MD CEO, Coleman Wires and Cables, joining me right here in the studios. Great to have you, sir.
Good to be here, Landy.
Yes, fantastic being here. The end of 2025. It's been quite the year. And I'm trying to imagine 2024 when we're coming into 2025. Looking at all that's played out, so far, how would you rate both years?
2024 was a really difficult year for most manufacturers when you look at it. Because we came out from 2023 elections with a lot of what we call ad blows, but definite ad blows that were necessary in terms of the petrol subsidy removal, harmonization of the FX windows into one, and that impacted massively inflation. It basically also turned into a massive loss by 2024. Exchange rate losses massively impacting the bottom lines of most of the manufacturers by the time you looked at their end of year figures for 2024. But be it may, we've moved away from that now. And I think 2025 literally meant most of those macro policies of the government itself, especially the central bank, seem to have done something right between 2024 and now. Inflation went up as high as 35%. You had the rebasing that also brought it down to about 25% from 35. And now we're looking at inflation now down to 14.45%. And
I wonder if anybody saw that coming.
14. Really, 14. Really, I think we all did, because for me, I did. And I took a position that, look, it was going to happen. It was consequences of certain macro policies that were difficult, but they were steady. And they were, I'll say the CBN was stricter on the policies, and people actually could understand the policies this time. And there was no deviation on policy. No favoritism on policy. I'll say that's the real direction. And that helped. Eventually, speculation on the FX scenario, nobody's speculating. If you speculate on FX today, you're looking for trouble. The window.
I remember you said that. Was it 2024?
Yeah.
You did say that. You said, don't bet against the Naira. That was the exact word.
And it happened. Because, look, what for me I looked at is that who was actually heading the CBN, and for the short period of time he had been there, you actually looked at, we were having a CBN that was more interested in the long-term macro policy than short-term gains only. And two, you literally looked at the scenario. Let me not hit the nail in the head. The corruption factor, really, the systemic issues we had that had influenced macro policies, really we were coming out of it. And kudos to the CBN Governor Cardoso and his team, really. For me, I can't believe that in 2 years we have a very stable macro policy, and the situation has enabled businesses to be able to predict a lot better. And the stability of 2025, I'll say, has given a bit more confidence to the market. And you can see in the figures, you can see the stability, you can see even in the growth. When you look at the figures that will come out of even any of the sectors, in terms of their bottom line PAT, BPTs, that you'll be seeing at the end of this year, and we'll be looking at the figures, most likely you'll start seeing by first quarter of next year, figures coming out from every sector of Nigeria. They'll all be more positive. And we have gone through that recovery, and now we're going to a growth stage. That, to me, is where I see it going.
Fantastic. Well, looking at the macroeconomic indicators, for 2025, which ones give you confidence, at this point, and which one is still giving you worry?
I think today, if we have to look at it, the biggest confidence we have on the macro policy is the FX-related policy. It's very stable. The stability of the FX, now it's almost predictable. We're between 1.4 and 1.5. And it's predicted. We would appreciate, but I think the CBN literally is trying to control things so that we don't literally get into another scenario where an appreciating currency becomes a negative position because we go into an import dependent scenario. So I see the stability of the 1.4 scenario to the 1.5 scenario over the course of 2026. Now, so that gives me the real concern still is bordering on the interest rate factors and some areas that are, if you look at the interest rate MPR today is at 27%. I do not expect, and this is where the worry comes from the manufacturer's point of view, we do not expect a fast-paced reduction in MPR. It's not going to happen because you have to balance inflation, balance FX to actually, so yes, most likely a 3 to 4% reduction over the course of 2026 is the expectation. So we're getting an MPR at about 23, 24 towards the end of the year. Take the discount factor. But the good thing about it is that no matter how you see it, interest rate will go down. Now, would it get to the rate at which we want immediately? Of course not. But we will see some incentive or buzz that is happening in terms of spending dynamics, which should cushion some of the situation that I'll look at it. In terms of, look, spending power would improve. You have a stable currency. And you have to remember that if we look at our 2024, when I was saying, oh, the Naira at the beginning of the year, the reality is today, for those of us that have held the Naira, you've had an appreciated Naira, which means your worth in Naira has increased in value, which also means that simultaneously people's buying power has also improved in value. So if you have had a pay rise in 2024, and a lot of people between 2023 and 2024 got a massive pay rise to cushion inflation, cushion the impact of all the negative that came out of harmonization, removal of subsidy, but I can't reverse your salary, can I?
No.
So the good thing also is an appreciated currency, a stable currency, inflation going down automatically means your purchasing power has improved. Take, for instance, especially in agriculture.
But some other, wage earners complain that wages have not risen as much as inflation and the currency devaluation. If depending on where you're coming from, at this point, it's still sticky.
The reality is wage should never match inflation because if you're managing inflation, the expectation is over time, inflation should come down. It's only wage should actually rise or most likely above inflation. If you're dealing with an hyperinflation scenario where literally we have a runaway inflation, we didn't have that. So if you took wage above the limit, what will happen to us is what happened to the textile industry. What killed the textile industry? Wages ran above their ability for them to reverse it. And by the time, and what created that? The textile industry in the 80s were giving cheap licenses that enabled them to actually buy dollars on the cheap, and they were making crazy money on import license. The import license made more money than they actually did producing in textile. Now, the problem happened is that they were declaring a lot of profits, especially those that were public quoted. And they were increasing wages at over 100, 200% because they felt they were making money. The reality set in when you actually made import license to everybody, it made it equal. So there was no exceptional gains anymore. You can't reverse. When you're looking at an inflation figure, you cannot compare it to a stable scenario. Wages should go up, but should moderate and then stay in line with inflation. if we go too high, what will happen with most businesses, let be sincere, they take wages so high up, and you find out when things stabilize, they can't reverse it, then they can't sustain the repayments or the payables that they have. And you end up in another crisis with businesses shutting down because they can't sustain their workforce. What we have to be very careful is I think, as Nigerians, is that we shouldn't go sentimental over what short-term gains will give us and leave the long-term. For a manufacturer to sustain a business today, you have to think of the long goal. You cannot be thinking of just today. Because your manufacturing plant doesn't shut down, your equipment is not a one-year equipment. It's a lifetime equipment. So you have to look at the sustainability of your growth and of your scenarios. I think the biggest impact for next year for it to work would be us merging a bit of the inconsistent fiscal policies with the consistent macro policies. Now, I think that would be the biggest game changer for 2026. Yes, we have a risk factor of we moving it closer into an election year of 2027. That's still an underlying risk, the security risk. Quite a few factors are still there in terms of risk analysis. But leave the risk analysis a little bit down and look at what will balance growth. And to me, some of the fiscal policies are now necessary. Because look, we cannot reverse interest rate into zero overnight. So what are the incentives to actually get us there? One of the key things, and I think, is one of the gas policies in Nigeria now. This is the time for the government to take the bull by the horn. Yes, you wiped off a lot of things, but the reality is the manufacturers today, 99% of them are the one literally having their own independent power source, whether diesel, but majority have now moved to gas. The gas inconsistency on policies for a few against the many doesn't make sense to me, sincerely. And I have to be frank with the government. It is not sensible for a few to have subsidized gas pricing, while the majority that have also invested in the gas are paying $8. It doesn't make sense. Now, I think even MAN proposed to the government that, look, this was more than almost a decade, 8 years ago, that we should get gas to at least $4 to $5, including the transport
Because
cost.
in the global market, I think it's around $2 to $3.
It doesn't make sense to me that Nigeria wants investment in industry, but is making the power cost not as cost effective as the gas we sell to others. So if I'm selling gas as a country to a third-party country, China, and they're selling $4 or $3.80, and I'm selling gas in Nigeria at $8 to where the source is, it does not make sense.
So this reminds me of what Mr. Dangote said, recently about, cement prices here in the country. He said it's more expensive here.
Correct.
Because of a number of factors. But when you sell it, when you export, he's able to sell cheaper in other markets.
Correct.
And I know you also sell in other markets. Is that the same story?
It is. But our own story is even worse. We are not being able to be competitive outside the market as we should be. Because unlike cement, where 95% of source of raw materials is local, 95% of source of cable is not local. So that also impacts. You have an import element. And when your import element in Nigeria is not zero, unless you're in a free trade zone, and that changes the dynamics. Now, we hope that we see ourselves as a processing country. Yes, we have free trade zone policies, but it needs to be better harmonized also, and also for those that need it, they need to have it. The major difference on the tax policy now for the free trade zone is now they're taxable, which means their incomes are taxable. The imports and exports are not, but their incomes are. For me, I have no problem with that. I know some people will say that's very controversial, but even if I'm applying, you should pay taxes. Now, we have no issue with that. I don't think any manufacturer, even MAN, has an issue with the tax policies. What we keep saying is that whatever we do...
So you're not as nervous as everyone else for January 1st?
I don't think we should. I think the nervousness will be for those that don't pay it. For me, I paid my taxes, and for me, I pay my company taxes, and I pay a lot of it. And we are disadvantaged when people don't pay. We're seeing scenarios of companies that don't pay look as if they're more competitive, but those that pay are penalized for actually paying because they're focused on, and the ones that don't pay are not really as focused on. But the policy changes a lot of things. It's bringing those that don't pay in. If you look at it, majority of the people complaining, I think are more of those that don't pay. The people that pay are quiet because there's a benefit. Your tax, your company income tax reduces in year one. So we're going from a 30% tax to a 25% tax. Now, a lot of things changes maybe to the benefit of those paying. And if you look at it, for the small businesses, there's a lot of waivers, you know, and I think Nigeria finally woken up that, which happens even in the UK. Your first 80 to 90,000 pounds of sale is not vatable. You should not declare VAT. You are not a VAT client to the HMRC. Same thing here now. It's saying 100 million naira worth of, you are not taxable in terms of what you pay in terms of company income tax is gone. So there's a lot of things that would enable this country grow the right way and would actually now bring in the right people into the tax net. The reality is that a lot of companies and a lot of businesses are not in the tax net. I've seen places where someone believes the levy is paying in the market is the taxes to the government. The levy, and I asked that person just years ago, when the first time that person got called in by the tax office, he said he believed what he's paying all his life in the levy. I said, how much is the levy? I think about 50,000 a year for the trader. And he felt that was the taxes. I said, and you sent your child to school in Nigeria, to the public school. You actually benefited from the same universities that are public related, but you paid 50,000 and you're almost 60. And so why? There's certain things we have to look at that those that are paying.
So I guess education, you know,
we need to. I think
a big role.
the government needs to play more role in educating everybody about the tax policy. You know, by coincidence, I met Taiwo Dele by coincidence at the airport, and we spoke about it. And I said, certain things you just have to let people know more about, because they're scared about their investment, they're scared about their savings, they're scared about the taxes. And, you know, the real fact is, if me and you put our money in the bank and we get interest and they take withholding tax, that's the end of tax. But a lot of people don't know that. They believe that, okay, the interest again that they've earned is tax again. That's double taxation. So there's a one-off withholding tax that goes off your interest that you have paid immediately at 10% withholding. That's end of it. Nobody in the world, in Nigeria today, can actually hold you or me for tax again once that interest withholding tax is taken. So that's your income. So what you're paying taxes on is separate to non-withholding tax issues. So we must have a better understanding of the impact of the taxes to the businesses. But the greatest element of what we need to do, and I still want to focus on that, is that the fiscal policies that we must enable industry in 2026. Because when you look at even our GDP figures, we're still fluctuating on manufacturing. Agriculture has helped. Fantastic. Yeah, today a lot of things in agriculture, cost has come down, Gary has come down because cassava became literally it. We were flooded this year season with cassava. And so a lot of things have come down in price because the weather was right, the rain, the production was right, the yield was right, and helped in the inflationary figures, and also helped in our GDP figures. But how do we keep manufacturing figures not fluctuating? We cannot survive this country without manufacturing. We cannot survive this country without processing. So certain things, we just must make sure fiscal policy must balance micro policy. It doesn't matter if I have the cheapest interest rate. It doesn't matter if I have a stable currency. If I cannot produce cost effectively, it's still a problem. And that is the part that the government needs to actually put a lot of. And the good thing is, if we look at the ministers we have today, they're more technocrats than politicians. And that is helping in industry today and in trade, industry, trade, and investment. We have two ministers that literally understand what the onion is, especially the substantive minister. So we got the people with the right onions. We got in communications, we got in finance, and so many ministries are filled with people that are capable. What we just need them now to do is that, look, please, can you just sit down, put a think tank together, and look at impact analysis, quick wins. I think first quick wins is get the gas policy right. Second quick win will be also look at the monetary tariff, the tariff measuring policy, which has not been signed off since 2023. We keep getting it moved, 2024, 2025, because that's where the tariff guidelines are moved up or down in order to protect some industry, in order to ease other industry. And that has not been signed off. And we've told again, it will be signed off in 2026. When? Now, we've lost 3 years for a manufacturing sector to be incentivized by that or be protected by that. So the impact is negative, straight off. So if they don't sign it off again in 2026, January, I don't see how they want to have a consistent 4.5. Everybody's looking from a 4 to a 4.5 by the end of 2026. If manufacturing still continue to flutter on those figures, we're going to struggle again.
All right, so get that, gas policy right for 2026. Then we can see, manufacturing actually, gain more grounds when it comes to contribution to the GDP. All right, definitely we've seen a lot of milestones from Coleman wires and cables in 2025. What are we seeing in 2026?
For us, I think we're still seeing a lot of opportunities. I think we've been always positively thinking of the economy. We see opportunities in different sectors, telecom sector, oil and gas with a lot of FIDs coming up. And we see the export market, really. And I think that's going to be the game changer for us, the export market. It's not really the Nigerian market. Nigerian market, I think we're going to get that right between 2026 policies coming out the way with it. But I think for us as Coleman, I think really is to see that the infrastructural spend that we expect to actually be a boom year in 2026 to 2027 is to actually see the expenditure going local and to also see the policy encouraging the export. Because if today you've got a business that can satisfy 50% of Africa from one location, I don't see why you should not enable it. And that to me, I think, and sincerely, we've seen a lot more listening ears from the government than we used to see. And that to me is going to be our game changer. So the export market is the future market in terms of Coleman. The Nigerian market, of course, we're very happy.
Let's not abandon the Nigerian market.
We can't abandon the Nigerian market, ever.
Fantastic.
So seasoned greetings to everybody, anyway, channels and the whole of Nigeria and to all our clients. And I think for us, really, we've been thankful for 2025, 50 years of the business. And we still look forward to the next 50 years. Fantastic.
Thank you so much, Mr. George Onofo, as the MD CEO, Coleman Wires and Cables. I guess at this point, I'll see you in 2026.
Definitely, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming, sir.
Take care.
All right, we'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll find out what to expect also for Nigeria's stock market and other variables. That's in a moment. Just stay with us.